I wanted to just start by introducing myself. My name is Dr. Allison Brennan. I'm the Executive Director of Special Education for the Great Neck Public Schools, and I'm joined by a few other staff members. I'll ask them to introduce themselves as well.
Hi there, good evening. Dr. Edel McCorville, Special Education Supervisor. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Hi, I'm Nicole Darsa. I'm the Intake and Accommodations Manager for Student Access Services at Hofstra. I'll talk a little bit about my role in a bit, but I, support students in disability services at our college.
Okay, we also have with us
Erica Samdi, Transition Coordinator for Great Neck Schools. Good evening.
Okay, so thank you for everybody, to everybody for joining us tonight. So Nicole Darsa, who just introduced herself, is our guest speaker for this presentation on transition to college. She is the Intake and Accommodations Manager of Student Access Services at Hofstra University, but she's going to be speaking about the process for the transition to college for students with disabilities that would apply to, any college experience moving forward. There is a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So if you'd like to put questions in at any point, you can certainly do that, and we will be answering them at the end of the presentation. Okay, so I'd like to turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you. So I'm just going to share my screen. If at any point as I'm speaking it doesn't follow me, just let me know. But really just to start, like I said, I'm the Intake and Accommodations Manager for Student Access. So one thing right off the bat, you'll see at the college level, there's different titles, different positions. But in terms of kind of my role in the office, it is registering incoming students. So reviewing documentation, which we'll discuss in detail, but that's going to vary based on the nature of a student's disability. And also other roles kind of that I play in the office. I supervise our testing lab. So many college campuses do have testing labs for students that receive any sort of testing accommodations, whether that may be something like extended time on exams, a reader, scribe, things of that nature. So again, the titles vary across different universities, but every college campus, of course, is going to have some level of a disability office to implement student accommodations at the college level. So I'll speak a little bit to Hofstra, but really we'll just be generally speaking about the differences between high school and college and kind of the responsibility of the student and kind of the parent role as well. And hopefully you're, working with your student, helping them become a self-advocate. So that's a really important piece at the college level. But just an overview, our office provides equitable access for students with disabilities. The biggest piece in college is access. So students do have to take the step to register, but again, it's the equitable access. Reasonable accommodations are determined by us based on a review. Typically, a student will have to submit an application and then documentation, which we'll discuss in further detail. And we also support students in utilizing approved accommodations, and those will usually vary between academic, classroom, and housing. But again, we'll talk about those, as well. And biggest piece that I like to start by talking right off the bat at the college level, it is the responsibility of the student to self-disclose to the disability office if they wish to receive services. So that self-disclosure piece has to happen. Again, at every college, it will be different, but will usually involve contacting the disability service office. So it may be submitting a self-disclosure form, submitting an application and documentation. But that's just kind of general overview. So really important just to know, as your student may be applying to colleges and, looking at their support services, for, students that are going to need accommodations. Just make sure you have an idea kind of what their registration process and procedures are, but they're usually going to be pretty standard. So a lot of times, parents and students have questions about the differences between high school versus college. So this is just a very general overview. And at the end, this presentation, you can also feel free to share this in case, so, you guys can have it available. But at high school, usually special education, resource room, those are going to be kind of, the people and, area that is implementing the accommodations and supports. At the college level, disability office. They may not have the same name. It may be services for students with disabilities, student access office, student access services, but it will be some sort of, combination of that. Then we have the kind of the laws that govern the students. So at the high school level, it's going to be the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. At the college level, it's the American with Disabilities Act in Section 504. So again, different, governing laws. It's just good to know, at the college level that these are, the policies and procedures that the universities are required to follow. Then at the high school, the school is the primary responsible for identifying students that need supports and arranging those accommodations. So a lot of that is done for the student, right, by the school. Again, I'm going to keep reiterating this. At the college level, the student now must self-disclose and register with the office. There's not going to be someone that comes up to that student and knows that they're, have a disability or that they want to register. The student, again, has to take that step of self-disclosing to the typical, whatever the disability campus office is. Then in terms of high school, again, the Individualized Education Plan, IEP, is typically what's going to include students' accommodations, their progress and plans, that many people at the high school level, the guidance counselors, teachers, kind of all work together on. At the college level, this is also a very important piece. The IEP 504 plan do not carry over. In addition, IEPs are typically not a fulfillment of documentation. However, I would say like a learning disability, ADHD, oftentimes the requirement will be a psychoeducational evaluation. And many times a student that has the IEP at some point has received that evaluation. Ideally within 3 years is a typical requirement for college level in terms of how updated it should be. I usually say high school, you definitely will want an evaluation from, at least 9th grade, but sooner or, 11th and 12th grade, if a student does get an evaluation, that is ideal because that supports us in determining those accommodations. But again, the documentation requirements typically for learning disability, ADHD, ASD is going to be that psycho ed evaluation. And then just really quickly, things like chronic medical diagnoses or mental health. Usually the requirement's going to be a letter from a physician or a treating professional. Again, every college will vary, but that's kind of just typical requirements. Usually it's just going to either be the psycho ed or a letter, from a treating professional. And then, so again, that's, big difference from high school in terms of the IEP not carrying over. I'll also just add one more piece to that. Accommodations that students received in high school may not translate at the college level, which is something important to consider. So just as one example, in high school, maybe the student had a reader for exams, whereas in college, typically it's going to be some sort of assistive technology. So at Hofstra, we use Kurzweil. So any of our students that maybe had a reader in high school are able to use our testing lab, put headphones on, and have the exam read to them through the Kurzweil software. So again, it may not be the exact accommodation students received at the high school level, but there are many comparable accommodations, particularly for testing. Then in one piece I like to mention, so at the high school level, again, psycho ed evaluations, they are no cost to the student. When the student leaves high school, that is no longer the case. So unfortunately, sometimes students come to college without the evaluation and not having one received. So that will usually be an out-of-pocket expense. Insurance typically doesn't require cover the cost of these evaluations. So ideally, if a student can get an updated evaluation again in high school, that is ideal. If that's not to happen, just as an example, at Hofstra University, we do have a Saltzman Center that does evaluations for students. There is a fee associated with it, but we have staffing made available. So again, that won't be typical for every college, but the requirement of the evaluation will be likely, again, for learning disability, ADHD. And then modifications to curriculum. So we see that a lot more in the K through 12 than you will at the college level. Each college does vary, but usually there's not going to be specific like course modifications. It's going to be more of those academic classroom housing. One exception that I'll just mention because it comes up frequently that's listed there, foreign language substitution. Again, it will vary a little bit based on the institution. Again, Hofstra doesn't do an exemption, but we have a substitution, which usually if a student was exempt in high school, it is very likely they'll qualify for that substitution. You can't quote me on that, but there is a good chance, especially if they have a learning disability. But then there's other alternatives colleges usually have. So as an example, at Hofstra, we have ASL as a language. So some students fare much better than that than other languages. So that's kind of an alternative. And then our advising office also has an option where students don't have to go to the highest level of the language if they may be strong enough to, get through a level 2 of a language. So again, usually that's just our college. We have 3 options right there. So every college is going to be a little bit unique. But if the foreign language is a concern, that's just something to kind of keep an eye on. Usually the colleges will be able to tell you what their policies are, before, enrolling into the university. And then last piece, of course, that I always want to mention is the parent is often the primary advocate at the K through 12 level for many reasons, but at the college level, the student again is expected to be the self-advocate. But I do add in there with support from the disability office as needed. So we understand for both parents and students, it can be, a scary transition. But the biggest piece to know is as long as the student is willing to come speak to us, we're going to be able to support them and help them. And that goes for, issues with faculty, getting their accommodations, registering with the office. So just another piece again, big difference as the student has to be the self-advocate. And really quickly, I'm just going to go through the registration process with our office. Again, it's going to be very similar at many colleges. We have an application for services that students typically will email us. And then the second piece is submitting appropriate documentation, which I already kind of mentioned some of those requirements. But these are some of the general disability categories. Again, colleges may be a little bit different in how they kind of code and, note these, but appropriate documentation is going to be required, again, for a student to register, with a disability office. And then accommodations versus programs. So this is a really common question I get. Colleges are required to provide accommodations to students with disabilities. Again, that the offices, the size of the offices, the titles may vary. The one thing, though, that colleges do not require is additional programs. So programs are typically fee-based supports, and they often include one-on-one attention. Typically with a learning specialist will be the title, but again, it could be an academic coach or anything of that nature. Colleges are not required to offer fee-based programs. So if you have a student that has received a lot of support in high school or throughout their K through 12 journey, they may want to look into one of these fee-based programs where they're going to have that kind of one-on-one guidance and support. I'm going to mention the 2 programs we have just to kind of give an idea of what's available out there. So one program we have, which is very well known, it's our PALS program. So it is the program for academic learning skills. It is a fee-based program designed to assist students with learning disabilities and ADHD, and entries determined by application and interview at the time of admission into Hofstra. Really what happens is a student gets accepted to Hofstra and then they interview for the PALS program. And what's great about the program, it involves weekly meetings with the learning specialist in the office to go over things like time management, organizational skills, writing support. Our program isn't content tutoring specific, but we work with students on papers, written assignments, things of that nature. And of course, we make sure students are utilizing their accommodations to the fullest extent. So again, accommodations separate from the fee. There is no fee associated with accommodations. But with fee-based programs, you're going to see that there. I will just add to that, while there's no fee to accommodations, there may be certain situations, just as an example, like assistive listening devices like FM systems that may be the student's requirement to bring in. But again, typically accommodations like note-taking technology and things are going to have no cost. The other program we have is the academic coaching program, very similar to our PALS program, but really open for any student registered with our office. And again, very similar in executive functioning, time management, organizational skills. But again, these are just kind of typical programs. Many colleges do have learning skills programs. Many colleges have autism programs. So again, those are kind of some of the additional fee-based programs you may see on a college campus. Last piece I'll mention with this as well, sometimes the offices are also separate. So as an example, at Hofstra, we keep everything together. So everything is kind of housed under our director. We have our learning specialist, PALS program, but it is all one office. Some colleges, you may see that they have their, disability office, and then they may have a different, programs that are kind of, separate within a separate director, things of that nature. So again, not to avoid confusion with that, every college just structures things differently based on demand and size. And again, I already went through this, but again, just a little bit more information for PALS, individualized sessions, addressing unique needs, learning strategies, time management, and typically the learning specialists, again, qualifications will vary based on colleges, but they are often going to be professionals with master's degrees or doctorates that have backgrounds in special education, English, writing support. So again, they're very accustomed to working with students with learning differences and being able to help and support them. And this is a list right here. It's by no means a comprehensive list. I just like to include some of the more frequent accommodations you may see on college campuses. So for testing accommodations, extended time, time and a half, and double time are usually our most frequent. Distraction reduced environment or smaller proctored environment, use of computer for exams, calculator for exams when appropriate, scribe reader are common testing accommodations. And then we've already discussed a little bit the classroom accommodations. So in-class note-taking services or note-taking technology, being able to record lectures, a possible attendance modification, assignment instructions in writing. A lot of these may look similar from high school or seem a little bit different. Again, the names of them may also vary based upon, the college, that your student may be looking at. And communication accommodations are going to be more of the assistive text, so speech to text software like Dragon dictation, note-taking technology. At Hofstra, we utilize Otter AI, and it provides transcription to students for note-taking, and it also provides the audio. So it's great because it gives students both modalities for note-taking to kind of really support students based on their unique learning style. And housing accommodations also, are available on campus. It could be, medical singles are one of the most common recommendations we see, adjustable desk within the classroom or housing, maybe having like a lower loft, wheelchair accessible room, all of things of that nature, emotional support animals and service animals. Again, every college's policy, will be different in terms of the requirements and how to register. The last piece I'll mention too with this is timeline for colleges. I always say the earlier the better. So once a student, commits to a college of their choice, one of the first things you want to do is make sure they get connected to the disability office so you're clear on the requirements. Of course, in the beginning of the semester, it is very busy for, disability offices. So it is good to get documentation in over the summer if possible to make sure ideally that your student may be able to get set up earlier. At Hofstra, if a student submits us documentation in June, we invite them in, review the accommodations in person or Zoom to make sure the student's good to go come September. Also, Hofstra does kind of rolling accommodations, which most institutions will do. So there's no necessarily deadline ever for accommodations, but again, usually they're not going to be retroactive. So if a student applies in November because they realize they're struggling in their classes, it's likely they're not going to be able to go back on those past exams they didn't get the extra time on. So again, very important that students get connected early and to just remember that they don't have to use the accommodations. So a student may be approved for extra time, but it's going to be their choice if they want to take it, with the testing lab or with their extra time, whatever it may be. So it's always better to register. Of course, it's confidential. And then it's up to the student, where they go from there. But I definitely encourage students to consider at least registering early on and then make the choice of if they want to utilize their accommodations and to also see what they'll be approved for at the college level. And then just last two pieces. So groups are also something you may see on college campuses. At Hofstra, we don't have any fee associated with these, but they're just to really support students registered with our office. So we have a stress management group that just kind of is a place for students to connect and talk about, transitioning to college, the stressors of college and all of that. Adulting 101 is a group that supports students in learning things like financial responsibility. My colleague Victoria does a great job of bringing like presenters to that meeting, to that group to support students kind of in, again, that transition as an adult. And then the last group we have is Social Network Live, that's co-run also by a member of our counseling staff, and students can work on social skills development and things of that nature. So again, many colleges do offer groups. Sometimes they may be run by the Disability Services Office. They may be run by counseling. We also have some excellent groups. We have a social skills, a social anxiety group that many students attend at Hofstra and other support services. So I know that's a lot of information to take in, but that really, in essence, is kind of the basics, main differences of high school, college, things to keep an eye out for. My biggest recommendations, again, for students to self-disclose, to get connected to their disability services office. And I will also add, for parents, support your student in that process, but allow them to do it. Allow them to be the one that sends the documentation, allow them to be the one to communicate, with the disability services office, because that's going to help them, make that connection and get a touch point with the university. And I'll also add, with disability services, there isn't always necessarily a advisor, like you'll have, a specific point person, but there is going to be someone they'll be able to connect with early on. And then it's also important for the student to ask, are you going to kind of be the person I come to if I have questions regarding my accommodations or things like that? So whether the student's going to be in a fee-based program or not, the self-disclosure piece, connecting to the office, are all really important. And then also just with the fee-based programs, with those, there may be deadlines, like just as an example with PALS program, we are selective. We only have a certain number of slots. So if your student is interested in a fee-based program, then it is important to start the process early because there may be interviews and follow-up and documentation requirements. So that piece, you wouldn't want to wait till the start of the semester. You want to make sure you're definitely connecting to the student pretty much as soon as they have been accepted to the university, if not earlier. Of course, going on college tours and interviews, looking at those programs available. So that is, pretty much it. I put the contact information here. But of course, I definitely want to answer any, questions any of you may have to, support your student in navigating that transition.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We do have some questions, and I just want to remind anyone who's in the audience to use the Q&A to submit questions, and we will address them. So currently we have, and I also just wanted to mention, we had a few questions about getting the notes for tonight. Yes, we will be posting them on the special education page. So we will certainly have those available. Okay, so one of the questions is, when does a student send in the requirements paperwork, so the IEP and such, to colleges? What should be the timeline of that?
So good question. So it's really, I'm going to say, as soon as your student commits to the college that they are going to be going to, I would say submit the documentation. Again, I do have students that will submit in April, May if if they've committed to Hofstra, and we will start reviewing the documentation. Now, I will say, like, best practice, at least do it by the summer. So, maybe after graduation, June, July, August, those are usually the best times, but I would usually, go more towards June, July. Typically, disability office services should be open in the summer. And again, in terms of volume, it gets very busy at the start of the semester. So I usually recommend in the summer is a good time to get everything squared away, especially because there may very well be someone that replies back and says, we need further documentation. Again, if only an IEP is submitted and we see that there was an evaluation on there, we're going to say we need that psychoed evaluation. So again, even if like the scoring and the tests of the processing speed and everything is on the IEP, we do still want that full comprehensive evaluation. Again, it's really important for us because we are reviewing, of course, the whole student. We want the whole background, and we want to ensure that we have the full story and we're providing the student with the best supports possible at the college level.
Okay, thank you. There's another question about the services and the self-advocacy piece, which I think is so important. The difference in terms of between high school and college. So, for example, this parent is asking if a student gets counseling, is that something that would just be provided to them? Or are they going to have to self-advocate for it? And if so, what would that look like?
Really good question. So yes, there's still going to be a self-advocacy piece with the counseling. Absolutely. Every college will be a little bit different, but typically it'll be similar where you may either just call or email the counseling center. I do also encourage that conversation happening over the summer because if a student was regularly connected to a treating professional, college is not the time to stop that. I always encourage students, like, you want to be connected and have someone to talk to connect with. So just to give an example, so with Hofstra, if, of course, I see something in a student's file that's noted that, they had counseling or support services or they have a mental health diagnosis, I, pretty much for every student, I connect them to our counseling center. So for us, the student just has to call the counseling center and they'll schedule an intake appointment first, which is pretty common, just to kind of run through questions with the student, get to know them. At that point, they'll usually be assigned to someone. And in terms of cost and structure, that will also vary. So at Hofstra, students are able to receive free counseling. I do believe after a certain point, I think it's like 10 or 11 sessions, sometimes they do refer out, but they still can, meet with a treating professional and a counselor. So they have that available to them. At Hofstra, we also have group counseling available, so students can join groups at no cost. And in addition to that, it's important, again, with the counseling services to know many colleges also have like a crisis hotline. So an after hours supports person, like ours connects directly to public safety. So if a student calls in a mental health crisis, it will actually put them on call with a crisis to an on-call crisis counselor. So again, really important questions along with our services, because we do definitely register many students, with mental health, challenges and other disabilities, but they're going to also, of course, be receiving really important services through the counseling center as well. So again, we're more of the accommodation piece, where the counseling center, of course, is going to have that individual and group therapy. And again, the sessions, the structure will vary based on each college.
Just to ask a follow-up related to the counseling, when a student reaches out to a counseling center, like for example at Hofstra, in order to maintain the continuity of care, should they be reaching out to the counseling center ahead of time also, just in case there is a delay in terms of intake appointments, things like that, or is it usually pretty quick that they would get in?
I would still recommend absolutely doing it earlier. Again, counseling is probably similar. It is similar to our office, and that, again, a lot of students want to get connected right at the start of the semester. But I always encourage students, the summer is a good time. Again, it will depend on the college and when they start doing intakes. But oftentimes, like in August, they'll start doing intakes for students. Some colleges may wait to do the first intake until the student is official and has started. But again, that will vary. So you're going to want to call the counseling center office to, again, figure out their policies. But I would absolutely recommend, counseling is a very critical office. So it is also good, just like with ours, contact them early to see how quickly, students are able to be connected and when a first year student's first appointment can be, because it will range.
Okay, thank you so much. We also have a question about how quickly the support groups would fill up and how many spots are available in those types of groups. I'm thinking that this is related to the academic support, but if the person who wrote the question just wants to clarify that, if that's incorrect.
So yeah, the groups are the fee-based programs.
Mhm. And someone else is asking about how to get the extra help for the classes too. So maybe you can just speak a little bit more about that.
So the extra help for
Classes. So, additional support for classes. It's probably in terms of what you're calling it, I think it's just basically any sort of academic support that kids would continue to need in college that perhaps they received, in high school to address academic goals.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Hofstra, we have it's called the Center for Academic Excellence. It's a tutoring center. And basically, the way we have it structured is students are entitled to receive up to 3 tutors for their 3 classes, 2 sessions a week for their classes. So how it works is they get a 50-minute session. It usually is with like a peer student that would work with them, help them, with, their class. And of course, that's going to be course specific. So if they're, again, registered for an Italian 1 course, they would meet with that tutor. They can meet with them twice a week at Hofstra. Again, it's going to vary based on the college, but many institutions will have like some level of additional tutoring support for students. So that's an office, of course, we help students connect with to make sure they know how to schedule tutoring appointments and, all of that. Ours is done through like our Navigate portal, which is kind of our main platform for student appointments. Again, it will depend, but I will say that, our tutoring program is really strong. All of the tutors go through really comprehensive training. They do go through some training, with learning differences and styles. And what's nice too is sometimes there may be like 4 or 5 tutors for the class. So I also say to students, if maybe one doesn't work with your learning style, there may be another, that you can connect with. So regardless if a student's in a fee-based program or not with us at Hofstra, we connect them all to the tutoring center. And in addition, we also have a writing center. So that the benefit of the writing center, it's just to focus on essay support, writing development. That is at Hofstra housed by both administrators, doctoral students, faculty as well. And students can make multiple appointments a week with our writing center for 50-minute slots. They can be Zoom or in person, which is pretty typical now. A lot of services, at colleges are offered both ways to kind of support, where the student's at and which option they prefer. But writing center, is what we have, tutoring for, many of our core classes. There's also a lot of group tutoring for things like the sciences. So like biochemistry, all of those have pretty extensive group tutoring through our tutoring center as well. So as I keep mentioning, it varies, but those are, some of the supports we have in terms of tutoring and extra academic support.
Okay, and those would be the groups and such that you're speaking about. Some of them are fee-based then through your office?
So in terms of like the tutoring, the writing center, that's no cost at Hofstra. That's all, that's all through the Hofstra tuition. But in terms of the fee-based program, that extra piece that they're getting is the once-a-week meeting with a learning specialist. So that will be an hour weekly meeting to go over. Again, we will work on papers and then also send them to the writing center. But, working on, thesis development, working on brainstorming and things of that nature, but also that time management, organizational piece, and all of that. And then the SAS groups that we have, like things like the Adulting 101 and the ones of those nature, there's no fee with that. We do, but typically any students in those groups will be students registered with SAS. We don't have caps on those, like just the general SAS groups. And I know counseling also does their best to, accept students in the groups, but I do know that they do, have limits, I believe, at some point. in terms of the sessions. So I just always encourage students, if there's any groups they're interested in, definitely go early on.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't know if anyone has any further questions. Dr. McCarville, you look like you wanted to add something.
I do. This is Nicole. This is really informative. So thank you so much for this. And I'm just thinking, and speaking to parents, all of our students really have unique needs, and some colleges may be a better fit for some students than others, right? So the first step for parents, right, when they're thinking about college with their child, what do you recommend? Just some resources in terms of, looking for that good fit college. How would they go about it?
Yeah,
I know that's a big, broad question.
yes. Really good question. So the first thing I always say is visit the college, right? So the college visits are so important. Just like, at the end of the day, there's a lot of factors that go into the college decision. So if the student already knows what program they want to be in or what major they're interested in, you need to, of course, find, the school that's going to have that available. But another big piece for students should also be, what do they have in terms of their disability office? So the first piece I always say, go on the college website and, look like disability services for, whatever college it may be, and see what pops up, because right away you're going to see, like, do they already have some of their policies and procedures on there from the website? Can you already tell how to register? Can you see if there's fee-based programs, if that is an important factor for a student? Because of course, for students that want to be in a program similar to PALS, you definitely want to make sure that that's going to be available before committing to the college. So I kind of think just, as I know many students and parents do, kind of make the pro-con list, look at kind of what, the student is kind of looking for out of a college, and just factor in the, the piece of the disability office. Another thing I recommend when going to the college campuses, or doing a virtual meeting, whatever it may be, set up a meeting with a staff member. Because that's going to give you a chance to meet with someone in the office and hear a little bit more about their programs, about the accommodations that are available. Just as an example, like, not every college has a testing lab. So if that's something for a student that's going to be really important, you want to make sure, that that's going to be available, and what does that lab look like? So these are all questions I would really just recommend during those searches, to be doing that. For the colleges that might be a little bit farther away and harder to get a hold of, again, emailing, questions, setting up a Zoom is, equally, a great way to get connected. But it's really talking, to the disability services staff, getting to know them, learning about the programs, learning about what they offer, going on their websites and seeing what's there. And I'll also add, and our previous director, Julie, used to say this all the time, is where a disability office is also, really important to consider. Is it easy to find when you get to campus? What does it look like kind of when you walk in? What is, kind of those pieces too. Again, you want, your student to feel comfortable walking into the office, and that it's easily accessible. And, same thing with the testing lab as well. And, that it's not too hard to find. So that's another piece too that I would recommend. But really, it's similar to just the college piece as a whole. Is it just should be something that is factored in, conversations that are had. And again, depending on your student's level of support and what they're looking for, of course, like I would say, if they're looking at a fee-based program, then you also want to make sure you're really doing extensive research on the programs that are available, and to see how they're going to meet the needs of your student, how often they're meeting, who they're going to be meeting with. Is it going to be a learning specialist, with a specialized degree? Is it going to be an intern? Is it going to be an academic coach? Like, you want to kind of just ask those specific questions to really make sure that you have an idea, of what is available at the college and what is available at the disability services office.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I have another question for you. So I think a lot of our focus in the high school is, like, getting into college. But really the success is making it through college. What are some just tips and recommendations that you have, for families and students to have, not only that successful transition, but to really get through those 4 years and accessing the supports?
Really good question. So, I think you said it really well that, there's so much, to go into getting into college, and then you're there. And of course, we want you to be successful. We want you to be retained and get through college and get your degree and then also get a job after all of that. So some recommendations I would have from the students, I've seen and I've supported, I've worked with. The first piece is communication. So biggest thing, I know sometimes for parents it's hard. You may be asking your student, oh, how's school going? They're like, oh, it's good. How are your grades? Oh, they're good. Like, I'm doing okay. You really want to know the specifics, because a lot of times what happens, and I'll say particularly with, a lot of students in our population, they really do think they're doing fine because there really hasn't been any graded assignments until, October, November in the first semester. It's all kind of based on, a paper due at the end of the semester that they haven't worked on because they haven't really thought about it. So, some recommendations I would make, you could, if, your student's open to it, say, hey, like, why don't we kind of print out, in your first semester, your syllabuses and look them over together. The college syllabus is the key to success. It will clearly outline to the student, usually clearly, what are the requirements? When are the exams? When are the assignments due? How do you submit? How do you get in contact with the professor? What are the office hours? So for students, I would say that's kind of the first piece, is they need to read their syllabuses and then go over them, in detail. And I will say, I think, as a parent, you can try to support your student with that process, like maybe go through it together for the first semester, help them highlight the office hours, highlight the assignments, and along with having the syllabuses, having some sort of time management system. And the way I always approach it is, I'm not going to say to a student, you need to have a planner, go get one at the bookstore and bring it back here and we're going to go through it. Because if a student's not going to take the planner out of their bag, it's going to be useless to them. So I also encourage students to figure out, ideally before they come to college, what do they think is going to be the best time management system for them? Is it going to be an electronic calendar that they can pull up on their laptops if they're using their laptop for class notes? Is it something they can put on their phone? But whatever it is, they're going to want to have a monthly overview. So they're going to see, oh, in October, I have 3 papers due on the same day. I can't leave this to the week before. And those are the pieces that if students do that early on and keep themselves organized and together and stay on top of the work, they're much more likely not to get overwhelmed during that midterm and final time. Unfortunately, it's just the nature of college that it starts out slow, it gets really busy during midterms, it slows down, and then it's crazy during finals. So I think for parents, kind of checking in with your students, seeing how they're doing, how they're holding up, because in the first semester, it's a lot. It's a huge transition. So using those support services, reading the syllabus, having a time management system, those are things I've seen to be really supportive for students. And the third piece I would also mention is for the student not to be afraid to ask for help, whether that be, of course, with the professor if they're struggling, but also with their college campus. So if they're registered with the Disability Service Office, definitely have them come there and say, I'm having a tough time with this class. I think I'm falling behind. I don't know how I'm doing. That's another piece too. A student may very well in their first semester have no idea come midterms what their grades are or how things are looking. So that's the time to say, hey, I need to check in with my professors to make sure I'm doing okay. At Hofstra, we have mid-semester advisories to try to support students, but it really depends, on the college, what's available. But there's a lot of options oftentimes. Students may think in their first semester, I can't drop this class, or I can't change paths, or, there's no flexibility, where many times, and for a lot of my students, in the first semester, they may come in and I'm like, all right, like, we're going to drop this class and pick up a mid-semester class because that's too far gone. This one, your professor said, if you do this, this, and this, you can pick up your grade. So really just for students to know, like, ask for help and don't wait until the end of the semester. Like, if you know you're struggling, like, it's okay. And I also think for parents to kind of reiterate that to their students, to say, hey, like, if you failed your first exam, like, it's okay. It is college. It's a big transition. I say like a 3.8 in high school is not a 3.8 at the college level. It's very different. It's a lot more demanding at the college level. So, really for students, just encourage your student to ask for help, to reach out to the offices, have a time management system, whatever it is that works for them. Not kind of pigeonholing a student into, one idea that's not going to work for them. So again, catering to their learning style and what's going to work best for them.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful.
Okay, we have another question from the viewing audience. So how will the college admission officer factor in or consider a student's disability?
So it's a good question. So typically it does not factor into the decision. So, or I shouldn't say typically. So the way that it works, again, like just I'll give an example with like the PALS program. So just because a student is applying to the PALS program, it's not going to give them any precedent to get into the institution. So students get, and again, we don't look at a student's file really or anything until they are accepted into the university. So students first have to get accepted into the college. And then we will review, their documentation to be considered for PALS. Now, there could be times where there may be colleges that have maybe like transitional supports or programs that students can apply to. And in that regard, maybe there's, they may ask for documentation. But in terms of like getting into the institution, they would have to, again, be accepted into Hofstra. And then we would go over the accommodations and supports because they do have to meet all of the requirements of Hofstra to get into the university.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Okay, Miss Samdi, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I just wanted to let all the parents and students know that we did mail out Access VR letters. It's a New York State agency. We send it to all graduating seniors who have a documented disability with an IEP or a 504. And it is a transition agency that does work with colleges. So I just wanted Nicole just to kind of touch on how they work with Access VR and how they also work with the Commission of the Blind.
Yeah. So, one thing I'll say, so again, depending, we have kind of on our application for services, basically like a checkbox that says, are you connected to Access VR? So basically we'll work with students, and kind of, support them with that transition and any, services they're receiving and accommodations. So that's going to definitely be more case by case, but, they're a big support and help with the transition to college. And I'll also add with that, in the piece, because one thing I do want to say, because I have seen it, as well, is when students do apply to college and, write their, essay or they're applying for a fee-based program, it is their choice if they want to self-disclose, and share, like, just for as an example, if maybe they do feel that some of their grades may have been impacted, by the nature of their disability, if they want to share that in a college essay or talk about how they overcame obstacles from their disability and were able, to be successful, that's, definitely something they could consider doing. Of course, that is totally their choice if they want to disclose, but that's an option to consider as well.
Okay, anything else, Miss Samdi or Dr. McCarville? Okay, so I know that Nicole, you put the contact information here for Hofstra. Thank you very much. I want to also just thank you really so much for this wonderful presentation. You shared so much useful information that I think will help with the transition from high school to college, because it is certainly a very, very big step. So again, you can certainly reach out to Nicole at Hofstra. You can reach out to anybody on this panel as well. Of course, you have a lot of resources in your high schools with regard to other people who can support you, like the guidance staff, the counseling staff, and the case managers, psychologists, special ed teachers, anybody really on your child's special education team who's providing services. So again, I want to thank you very much for for attending today. And we will be posting the slides on the special education page on the Great Neck website. Okay, so I want to thank everybody again. Thank you, Nicole, Dr. McCarville, Miss Samdi. Have a good night, everyone.